Have you ever felt like you didn't exist in your own family? Like no matter how hard you tried, no one ever seemed to care? Indigo, 28 years old, has spent her life as a shadow in her own family. Despite her incredible talent for drawing, she was always overshadowed by her perfect younger sister, Briar. After leaving her family behind, Indigo found love and support in her grandmother, Magnolia, who encouraged her to embrace her artistic gifts and find happiness. But when she attended Briar's wedding years later, all the old wounds reopened, forcing Indigo to confront the cold, indifferent family that never truly saw her for who she was. "What are you drawing?" Magnolia asked as she approached me. I was absorbed in my sketch, the red pencil moving smoothly across the paper. "I'm drawing the birthday cake we ate together," I replied proudly, finishing the glossy red strawberry and showing it to her. In front of me, the lavish cake stood proudly, surrounded by images of Magnolia and our friends, all beaming with happiness. A smile spread across my face as I looked at the drawing, and Magnolia squinted her eyes, smiling gently in return. "9, your drawing is wonderful. You're like a professional painter," Magnolia said, patting my head warmly. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand. The simple gesture brought a happiness I couldn't put into words. I loved Magnolia deeply, despite the lack of affection from my parents. The warmth of Magnolia's hand was all I needed to keep me going. My name is Indigo, and I'm 28 years old. I love to draw and read books. During the day, I work as an office clerk at a small company, and at night, I immerse myself in my diary or draw comics, posting them on my blog and Instagram. I illustrate small daily life events in a humorous way, always striving for a positive ending. Even when I fail, I try to keep my perspective optimistic, both in my art and in my life. It brings me joy to see people resonate with my posts and leave comments or likes. My proactive approach to life is shaped by the environment I grew up in. I remember hearing a story about a famous writer who was approached by a beautiful actress. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if a baby were born with your intellect and my looks?" the actress said. The writer replied, "The child might end up with your intellect and my looks, though." The actress had hoped for a son, but the writer had warned of the consequences. "My father works for a major company in LA, and my mother was once a beauty pageant star. I've inherited my father's looks and my mother's intellect, but I've also inherited their insecurities. Relatives often say, 'You have your father's nose,' or 'Your mother wasn't good at studying either.'" These comments would only irritate my parents, and over time I began to feel like a disappointment. On the other hand, my younger sister Briar, 3 years my junior, was always the center of attention. Known for her cuteness and intelligence, she charmed everyone around her. Adults loved her for her clear eyes, high nose bridge, fair skin, and smooth hair. She was adored like an angel, and our parents doted on her, showering her with affection and praise, treating her as the ideal daughter they could never fault. Briar, realizing the power of their affection, cleverly turned it towards herself by casting me as the villain. When a dish was broken, she would accuse, "Indigo dropped it." If she neglected her practice lessons, the excuse was, "Indigo stopped me." If money went missing from Mother's purse, Briar would say it was because I told her to take it. I was always the one left to bear the consequences of her lies, and our parents always sided with her. They accepted the false narrative without question that I was jealous of Briar's excellence and bullied her, when the truth was that I was simply trying to stay invisible in a house that favored her. Living in this house felt like hell, yet I managed not to fall into despair thanks to the kindness of friends and my father's mother, especially my nearby grandmother. Magnolia always warmly welcomed me whenever I was driven out of our house. Magnolia repeatedly cautioned my parents, but when my mother vehemently argued back, blaming Magnolia, I had no choice but to mediate, saying, "It's okay, it's my fault." This situation visibly angered my parents, and Magnolia showed a sad expression instead. She poured deep affection into me, spoiling me greatly. Once, while Magnolia was folding laundry, she saw a drawing I made on the back of a flyer and praised me. "Indigo, you have a talent for drawing," and gifted me high-quality drawing paper and a set of 36 colored pencils for my birthday when they didn't celebrate for me. Magnolia prepared a huge whole cake. "We can't eat all of this by ourselves," she said with a laugh, and also invited friends. At Magnolia's house, enjoying hamburgers and a rich cream cake and opening gifts from friends, that moment of happiness was something I will never forget. My parents were aware that I frequently stayed at Magnolia's house. Initially, they were angry, saying, "A child spoiled by her grandmother won't grow up to be a good adult." But they quieted down as I reached the upper grades of elementary school. They focused on perfecting Briar, completely losing interest in me. The harsh treatment towards me ceased, and they began to ignore my presence as if I had never existed from the start. Only the bare essentials for living were provided, and that was all. By the time I became a middle school student, I realized that my parents no longer cared about me. Still, I hadn't completely given up hope, but when I was told coldly in my 3rd year of middle school, "We can't afford your school fees because your sister needs to take entrance exams," I finally gave up on receiving any love from them despite my father working at a major corporation and being fully capable of affording my tuition. When Magnolia heard this, she was so furious she seemed about to burst a blood vessel and suggested, "I'll pay for your schooling. You should come and live with me and go to high school." I intended to refuse, feeling sorry, but when I saw Magnolia crying, saying, "Poor Indigo," I couldn't stop my own tears and hugged her. Later, with the help of my homeroom teacher, I took the exams without my parents knowing and was able to enter a nighttime high school. I left home to start a new life at Magnolia's house, working part-time during the day and going to high school in the evenings. Magnolia said I didn't need to work, but I wanted to earn at least my own living expenses. After graduating high school, I left Magnolia's house and found a job as an office clerk at a small company in the neighboring prefecture, where I continue to work. I gave my parents my address, but they neither visited nor sent letters. We became completely estranged, even during Christmas. However, I finally managed to become independent and leave that house. I have always lived looking forward. Then one day, I received a letter from my sister for the first time. Inside the fancy envelope was an invitation to my sister's wedding. My sister, 25 years old and having barely seen her since middle school graduation, seemed to be marrying a high-earning man much like our father, capitalizing on our mother's beauty. Reuniting with such a family was painful, but I was the only sister she had. If I didn't attend, it might raise suspicions in her in-laws' family. I have been working as a professional for 10 years now, even though I am not the perfect daughter my parents envisioned. Showing that I am living a decent life might improve our relationship, even if slightly. I will attend my sister's wedding. After 10 years of estrangement, I casually posted on my blog and received heartwarming comments from my followers. With courage, I marked "will attend" on the invitation. The day of my sister Briar's wedding finally arrived. As the bride's sister, who must not be late, I drove early to the venue. The venue was an enchanting building modeled after a castle in a theme park, like something out of a fairy tale. Guided by the staff, I entered a room reserved for family. There were my aged parents and my beautiful sister, already dressed in her wedding gown. Briar, overwhelmed, I barely managed a greeting. They looked at each other and said, "See, Mom? I told you she would definitely come." I was taken aback by my sister's words. Mother exaggeratedly shrugged her shoulders like a character from a cartoon. "To think you'd show up at your sister's wedding after dropping out of middle school is beyond me." "What do you mean? You really haven't changed, still so thoughtless." Father, his hair thinned, looked at me with an expression of surprise. Even though I expected to be considered a nuisance by my family, I hadn't expected such a clear and harsh response. It was unjust to be criticized as insensitive just for attending my sister's wedding. "Briar, you sent the invitation, didn't you?" I asked cautiously. She smiled and frowned slightly. "Yes, I sent it, but even someone like you is family, so how could I not invite you?" Her usual sharp tone was there, but this was not the time for it. "So why do you resent me being here? Did you actually want me to come?" pointing out the contradiction. My sister touched her cheek and tilted her head. "Actually, that was true, but recently I realized it would be better to pretend you no longer exist than to invite you and have everyone ridicule your lack of education." What? I realized it just a month ago. I meant to tell you, but then today arrived. What does that mean? You behave as if I no longer exist, and you even find it troublesome to tell me? Shocked by this revelation, I felt my mother's piercing gaze cut through me like a blade. It can't be helped, she said coldly. You don't have any experience with marriage or a likely partner, so you might not understand, but preparing for a wedding is very hectic. We didn't think you'd even show up, so I told Briar that if she understands her place, she won't come either. Personally, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't have the courage to attend a wedding. It would be too embarrassing, right? My mother's laugh was hollow, unnatural, as if she herself didn't believe the cruel words she was saying. Don't say things like that, Mom, I cried, the words breaking out before I could stop them. I always believed my sister would invite me. We wanted her to know she's recognized, that she's loved and part of this family, that she's needed. What are you talking about? Briar sneered, her tone laced with false sweetness. I'm sorry for giving you false hope, but don't worry. We'll remember you as the kind sister who passed away early from a brain disease, she said, the words dripping with insincerity. She looked at me with exaggerated pity, as if she were a saint for tolerating my existence. It's impossible that a lie made up so suddenly would be believed by our relatives and your husband, she continued. Don't worry, you haven't been in contact with our relatives for a long time, right? It's a well-known fact that you were isolated from the family. I've told them you wanted us to have a quiet funeral without overshadowing my wedding, only with family. No further questions. I've told my husband, too. He believes whatever I say. What a thing to do. My heart sank, the finality of her words hitting me like a hammer. Since graduating from middle school, I had barely seen anyone other than Magnolia. Some relatives had expressed concern for me years ago, but that was a decade ago. If they were told I had died, they would believe it without hesitation. In that moment, as I stood there in stunned silence, my father threw something at me. It was the seating chart for the wedding. Take a look at this. Briar is marrying into a family of doctors. We can't introduce someone like you at such an event. I opened the chart slowly, almost mechanically, and my eyes scanned the names listed under the groom's side names I didn't recognize, all associated with the title Doctor. Take it as a keepsake and leave quickly. You no longer exist in this world, my father added with disdain. The sound of their laughter filled the air, cutting through me like a blade. My father's mocking tone, Briar's cruel chuckles, and my mother's dismissive laughter all seemed to blend together into a cacophony of rejection. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sting of their cruelty, and rushed out of the venue, my legs unsteady. I hurried to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I couldn't get the engine started. My fingers, stiff and uncooperative, failed to turn the ignition. Tears streamed down my face, falling uncontrollably. A mix of sadness, anger, and frustration churned inside me, as if dark paints were spilling across a canvas, creating a chaotic, messy reflection of my mind. I was furious with them, but I was even more furious with myself for having held out any hope, for believing that, somehow, they might care. I watched through the glass as people continued to enter the venue. I knew I shouldn't be here, but my body refused to move, heavy with the weight of rejection. My phone vibrated in my bag, pulling me from the haze of my thoughts. With cold hands, I took it out and saw a notification from Instagram comments of concern and encouragement from friends and followers, responding to my post about attending my estranged sister's wedding. The kindness of their words brought a strange sense of warmth, something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Moved by their compassion, I opened the story feature for the first time and shared my vulnerability, typing through tears. My family has declared me dead. It seems I have no reason to live anymore. As I typed those words, the tears flowed freely, each drop a release of the emotions I had been suppressing for so long. I couldn't help but feel like I was drowning in a sea of their rejection, but in that moment, with my friends' support, I realized that I wasn't entirely alone. I had people who cared, even if my family didn't. Soon after, another notification for a new message sounded. Encouraging words kept coming in. Indigo, you are not worthless. Indigo, I love your illustrated diary and your warm personality. I have been helped by Indigo's diary entries. Cut ties with such a family, Indigo. These were all words of anger and sadness from people I didn't know who were speaking out for me. I had completely lost my confidence, but these words gradually began to sink into my heart. Then, apparently having seen my Instagram story, my best friend called me, crying. Indigo, hold on. Such an obvious lie can't be sustained forever. Act with confidence for your grandmother who cares so much about you. With these words, I suddenly came back to myself. For my grandmother, who cries, gets angry, and laughs for me, she must be at this wedding venue without a doubt. Just thinking about how sad my grandmother would be if she heard I had died stirred up anger inside me. I am not a worthless person. I am not someone who should be ashamed of being alive. The ones who should be ashamed are those who scorn someone trying hard to live. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and firmly wiped my tears. Then I straightened my eyeliner and quietly opened the car door. When I returned to the venue, the reception had already started. I secretly peered inside through the glass. It seemed that a slideshow of the bride and grooms growing up was currently being shown. The slideshow included photos of our family, including me, and at the end of the presentation, the host mentioned the story of the bride's sister who passed away from an illness a few months ago. This caused a stir among the relatives, and everyone turned to look at my parents. My father stood up and said, Briar's sister died suddenly of a brain disorder. She was very kind, and she got along well with Briar, but was worried that her own illness might delay her sister's wedding. Next to him, my mother was pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. I couldn't believe that they could lie so boldly about me, whom they had just been talking with. The guests were unable to hide their astonishment as my father, with tears streaming down his face, said, She must be happy in heaven. Excuse me, do you have any business here? A staff member approached me, asking with a tense expression. When I answered, Actually, my sister asked me to do this surprise. Are you referring to the bride as your sister? The staff member asked with a puzzled look. I smiled, gathering my resolve, and said, Yes, that's right. I took a deep breath and firmly pushed open the doors to the venue. As I stepped through the entrance near the family seats at the back, where the bride's father was sitting, every pair of eyes turned toward me in an instant. The weight of their stares was suffocating, but then I remembered the encouraging words of my friend, and I regained my composure. My parents, oblivious to my presence, were still spinning their fabricated tales about me. But my sister, seated at the high table, immediately spotted me and shot to her feet. Before she could say a word, I raised my voice, louder than ever before. I am Indigo, the bride's sister. It took me a while to get back. Yes, hell was quite warm. I sweated a lot. The entire venue went silent. Oops, my mistake. Not hell. I was in heaven, right? It was a brain disease, wasn't it? I tilted my head playfully, though my heart was pounding in my chest. The room froze, the shock palpable. My sister was the first to snap out of it. Who are you? My beloved sister is no longer in this world. How dare you make such a cruel joke? Someone get this person out of here! Briar shouted from the high table, her face twisted in rage. It seemed they were desperate to expel me before anyone realized what was happening. But then, a voice cut through the tension. Indigo? Is that Indigo? Magnolia slowly rose, her eyes wide with disbelief. She staggered towards me, and I could see the shock in her expression. Indigo? Is it really you? Indigo? Oh, I'm so relieved. I couldn't believe it when they said you had died. Magnolia's hands trembled as she grasped the edge of my dress. I held onto her hand tightly, steadying her. Magnolia, it's me. Indigo, your beloved Indigo. I reassured her. Oh, Indigo, thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. I quickly wrapped my arms around her, helping to steady my grandmother. My aunt, Magnolia's sister, rushed over, worry etched across her face. Indigo, are you really okay? You're not ill? she asked, concern flooding her voice. While supporting Magnolia, I nodded at my aunt's worried expression. After handing Magnolia over to my aunt, I surveyed the room again. The groom's side was buzzing with confusion, and even the groom appeared stunned. The bride's side, especially my parents and Briar, was visibly shaken. Straightening the wrinkles in my dress, I drew in a deep breath and stepped forward, gathering my courage. Thank you all for gathering here today. I apologize for the inconvenience at such a joyful occasion. I am Indigo, the bride's sister. I was supposed to be here today, but my sister and parents told me to leave because they were planning to tell everyone that I suddenly passed away. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. I hope you can understand my desire to avoid shocking my beloved grandmother. Indigo, Magnolia whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. I was denied by my own family because I could not live up to their expectations. I continued, my voice steady, though my heart was heavy. From a young age, I was constantly compared to my sister and made to feel inferior because of my appearance and abilities. Wait a minute! My father's voice cracked, his face pale with disbelief, but I ignored his outburst and pressed on. My sister, perhaps influenced by our parents, or maybe it's just her nature, always cast me as the villain. Whenever she caused trouble, the blame was shifted to me. I was the one who bore the consequences for her actions. That's not true, my sister interrupted my statement. As the attention shifted to her, she began to tremble and tears started to flow. Ladies and gentlemen, it's embarrassing to say, but my sister has a habit of lying. This caused me to hesitate to invite her to the wedding, and I ended up falsely claiming she had died. I apologize for that lie. Briar, the groom, confused but supportive, stood by my sister. Amid the confusion, with attendees unsure of whom to believe, it was Magnolia who changed the atmosphere of the room. How disgraceful! Her strong, deep voice resonated throughout the venue. You have always bullied Indigo. Do you even have a human heart? But Magnolia, don't make excuses. It's disgraceful. Don't shame us further. Under Magnolia's stern rebuke, my sister trembled. I'm leaving now. I didn't want to attend this ceremony originally, but I came because I thought Indigo would be here. I should not have come to such a pitiful event. Indigo, let's go home. Magnolia warmly grasped my hand. I wanted to say more, but the warmth of her hand soothed my heart. Yes, let's go home. As we were leaving the venue, I heard my mother making a clumsy excuse. Briar's grandmother has been getting a bit forgetful. I quickly closed the door behind us to shut out her words. Indigo, come to my house tonight. I'll make your favorite donuts, Magnolia said gently as she stroked my hand. Yes, thank you, Magnolia. Relieved by her words, I clung to Magnolia and cried. Shortly after, all the relatives on my father's side left the venue. They were fed up with my sister and parents' reprehensible actions and had lost all desire to celebrate. Indigo, I'm sorry. I knew you were being treated harshly but couldn't intervene in family matters. I should have supported you more. My aunt apologized tearfully. As I comforted her, stroking her back while she cried, I understood that it's hard to interject in another family's affairs. Ultimately, I left the venue with my father's family. I hadn't told everything to my parents, but I felt proud that I had faced the situation head-on without running away. While relaxing and enjoying donuts at Magnolia's house, chaos ensued back at the wedding venue. My sister and parents argued to the groom's side that I was an uncontrollable person and that Magnolia was experiencing cognitive decline. However, since a large part of my father's family had already left the ceremony in protest, few believed their claims. Their repeated excuses only deepened the bad impression, and many guests left the venue one after another. During this, the groom stood by dumbfounded while his parents apologized to the remaining guests and encouraged them to head home. Visibly angry, my sister and my ever-changing parents declared, "We will recheck the facts and consult with the appropriate authorities if necessary," before leaving the scene. As the venue emptied, my sister and parents showed no signs of self-reflection. Under the watchful eyes of the staff, blinded by their misconceptions about me, they angrily headed to my apartment in the neighboring state where I live. But at that time, I was leisurely enjoying donuts at Magnolia's house, soaking in a warm bath, so I wasn't home. My father, frustrated that the door wouldn't open, kicked it, and my sister picked up stones from around and shattered the windows. A concerned neighbor thought the disturbance was suspicious and called the police, resulting in the arrest of my parents and sister on the spot. Shocked by the call from the police and the landlord's story, I was reassured by the landlord's sympathy, who encouraged me, saying, "You are a decent person. This is just unfortunate." After explaining the circumstances behind my family's actions to the police, they sympathized and recommended that I stay with relatives for my safety. Later, I met with the family that was supposed to become my sister's in-laws and apologized for the chaos at the wedding. I offered to pay compensation, but they refused, saying, "You have suffered as much as us. The truth about her came out before the marriage, which is fortunate," said the man who was supposed to be her husband, showing a helpless smile. He had contacted a detective agency immediately after the wedding to investigate my sister's past. The investigation revealed numerous falsehoods spun by my sister and parents. One such lie was that my sister attended a prestigious university and graduated, which I had also believed. However, I was surprised to learn that she had dropped out after 2 years because she tried to get close to a married professor for better grades and was subsequently sued by his wife. She boasted about working at a large corporation, but in reality, she was only working part-time at a convenience store inside the company's building. Breyer, even while working part-time, got close to a married man who visited her workplace and was sued again by the man's wife. After losing her job, she met the groom. He quickly took a liking to Breyer and was not concerned about her educational or employment history. The groom's parents were not fixated on a profession as a doctor and accepted their son's choice of partner. However, Breyer's lies were eventually exposed, leading to the annulment of the engagement, and she was told to never come near again. Breyer and my parents were left with the weight of their debts, 2 previous lawsuits, the wedding expenses, the honeymoon, and a new home. On top of that, repairs for my apartment added to the financial burden. Facing a total claim of around $100,000, they sought help, but were rejected by my father's relatives and mocked by my mother's family. "We cannot lend such a large amount to a liar," they sneered. My parents and Breyer continued to blame me, calling me ungrateful and labeling me a failure. But I was no longer afraid of them, the same family that had once left me yearning for love and acceptance. The child who cried for affection and wanted to belong no longer existed. When my father, veins bulging from his forehead, screamed at me to take responsibility for ruining their lives, I remained calm. "And how exactly do you expect me to do that?" I asked, my voice steady. He faltered, speechless. My mother and Breyer tried to speak, but their words failed them. "How can you sue someone you ignored as a child and treated as dead as an adult?" I challenged, watching them struggle for a response. There was only silence. "Maybe I should be the one to sue you. Do you want me to increase the compensation?" I pressed, watching their frustration mount as they choked on their words. Whether they would actually take legal action remained uncertain, but I knew this was the one thing they could no longer control my response. The fallout from the broken engagement and the police incident, brought on by my family's behavior, had already spread to my father's workplace. It threatened his professional reputation, and the people who once intimidated me now appeared foolish and pitiable. Time hadn't solved anything. It was simply that their values had become irrelevant to me as I grew up, and they no longer had any power over me. My family had stopped seeing me as a source of money when they nearly depleted their retirement savings. It was a bitter decision for them, but an inevitable one. Breyer, once their pride, now carried a tarnished reputation and was shunned by society. The shock on my parents' faces as they watched her fall from grace revealed the shallowness of their expectations. Breyer, once the center of their world, had lived in a bubble of self-centeredness, but now her foundation had crumbled, and her temper had become erratic and unstable. If my parents could honestly confront their mistakes and humbly try to change, there might still be hope for them, but the likelihood of them developing that kind of humility seemed slim. I made the decision to leave it all behind. I quit my job and moved to a quiet rural town with my beloved grandmother. There, I found a job at a small but warm company, and I began living a peaceful, fulfilling life. My days became an illustration of contentment, shared through my blog and Instagram as a daily diary. The serene moments of my life with my grandmother slowly gained attention. Many people commented that they found healing in the cozy, simple daily life we shared, and my following grew to tens of thousands. There was even talk of turning my diary into a book, and I found myself living in a dreamlike state, overwhelmed by the unexpected success. "Your drawings really warm my heart," my grandmother said, gently stroking my head with the same loving touch she had always given me. While the social recognition was gratifying, it was the sight of my grandmother's smile that brought me the most joy. I felt incredibly fortunate to be able to share this happiness with her. It was a life I never expected, but one I now cherished deeply, filled with gratitude and contentment. I truly felt lucky to have been born into this life, surrounded by warmth and love that was real. Indigo's relationship with her family is complex and deeply painful, marked by emotional neglect and systemic favoritism. Throughout her life, she has been subjected to emotional abuse, primarily from her sister Briar and parents. Their dismissive behavior, as seen in their treatment of Indigo at her sister's wedding, highlights the psychological toll it has taken on her. The constant comparison, belittling remarks, and exclusion have left Indigo feeling invisible and unworthy. Indigo's decision to attend the wedding, despite knowing how her family views her, reflects a deep-seated need for validation, even if it is from those who have consistently rejected her. However, the ultimate realization that her family, especially Briar, has no regard for her feelings is what drives her to confront the toxic environment. This turning point is a culmination of years of psychological damage, leading her to make the empowering choice to stand up for herself. The choice to leave and start a new life with her grandmother is a profound act of self-care. It signifies Indigo's psychological healing, as she removes herself from the source of trauma and surrounds herself with unconditional love. This decision not only symbolizes her reclaiming control over her life, but also marks the beginning of her emotional liberation. Willow's post on Instagram, and the subsequent support from her followers, reinforces the idea of self-worth independent of her family's approval. Her online community provides the positive reinforcement that she has been deprived of her entire life. This shift in her support system is crucial for her healing process, illustrating the importance of finding validation from healthy sources. Do you think Indigo should ever reconcile with her family, or is it better for her to maintain her distance for the sake of her mental health? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.
My name is Rachel. I'm 42 and work at a trading company. I have a precious fiancé now, and ever since I was young. My late father told me to study Spanish because it would become essential. I attended a Spanish language school and watched foreign dramas at home to become familiar with the language. In middle and high school, I was always the top student in Spanish. When I was in high school, my father passed away, leaving my mother, my younger sister Kelly, and me in a financially tight situation. I almost gave up on going to university, but my mother encouraged me, saying, "Rachel, your Spanish skills are top-notch, so you should work at a big company where you can use them as a weapon. I'll figure out the tuition, so make sure you go to college." Thanks to her support, I was able to pass the difficult Ivy League of Foreign Studies and now work at a major trading company. I always thought I should never forget the kindness my parents showed me. However, after my father passed away, my mother overly doted on Kelly, who is 10 years younger than me. When I got accepted to university, she was a little happy, but she didn't show much interest when I got a job. And she didn't seem to appreciate that it was in trading. More importantly, when I graduated from university, Kelly was still a 12-year-old elementary school student. My mother kept buying her things and praising her, enamored by Kelly's natural charm. I never received anything for my birthday, but she kept buying things for Kelly. This made me feel a strange jealousy at times. Whenever I tried to be affectionate with my mother, she would say, "Rachel, you are Kelly's big sister, so you need to be more responsible. You're supposed to be a role model for her," putting pressure on me. As soon as I started university, I began living alone. I was motivated by the favor of being sent to university and the pressure of being the eldest daughter. I wanted to live independently and contribute even a little to my mother and sister's living expenses. So I worked part-time during college, saved up. I deposited $300 from my salary into my mother's bank account every month, and $500 when I received bonuses. In my first year, I managed to put in a total of $4,000, even though I was living very frugally. However, my mother and sister never thanked me. They acted as if it was only natural for the eldest daughter to contribute that much. As I received raises over the years, I tried to gradually increase the amount I sent home. I rarely called home, and only occasionally received a little contact from my mother. I felt a growing distance between us. Even when I returned home occasionally, I didn't stay long. Time passed, and Kelly graduated from high school. Then, suddenly, my mother called me. "This time, Kelly is going to college, and I need a little more help from you." "I'm already sending money every month, aren't I?" "Well, yes. But that alone isn't enough. You went to an Ivy League of foreign studies. But Kelly is going to a private women's college. It's going to cost more. How much more should I add? Let's see. You're putting in $500 a month now, so I'd like 3 times that." 3 times, as in $1,500? That's impossible. Do you know how much I make? Oh, no, I mean, could you double it? $1,000? That's still tough. How about $800? That might be possible. Thank you for helping. I wanted to help my struggling mother. So I immediately deposited the money into the bank after payday. I owe a debt of gratitude for being allowed to go to college. If it helps them live better, then it's a small price to pay. However, about $10,000 a year was quite tough for me. The amount I could save became minimal, so I started doing freelance work at home. From my first job to now, about 20 years later, I've been sending money home. I don't want to talk about the total amount. As time went by, I turned 42. My mother called me again. I had a bad feeling. Next time, Kelly is getting married. Oh, that's great. I've been dating someone for the past 2 years. Well, never mind about you. Kelly is 32, right? So, we need money for her wedding costs. My mother cut me off. She wasn't interested in my life. Kelly always comes first. So, for the wedding and the honeymoon, could you help us out financially? Mom? I've been sending money home all this time, haven't I? I even increased the amount when Kelly entered a private university. Shouldn't that have added up to a significant amount by now? University. Oh, yes, that happened. I can't even save much anymore. I'm 42 now. Can't you manage somehow over there? It's really too much for me. Please, I just need a solid amount of money right now. How much do you need? Maybe $10,000? That's impossible. Oh, no, not that. $5,000 would be fine. You save $5,000 so easily, but besides the monthly support, you need that much for a wedding? Is Kelly there? Let me talk to her on the phone. Then, my mother yelled at me. You don't understand anything. I won't ask you for anything anymore. There's no need to let Kelly talk. Do you know? Recently, she's been sending us $2,000. We've been living on that. You should be grateful to your sister. My mother hung up abruptly. I didn't understand what she meant by all this. It's fine to arrange money for a happy occasion. But why did she start with asking for $10,000, then change it to $5,000? When I said it was difficult, and then refused to let Kelly talk, claiming she's been sending $2,000? If that amount of money was available, they should have been able to manage just fine. And then to tell me to be grateful to my sister? It all seemed too incoherent. I had been sending money home for 20 years, fluctuating in amount, but consistently supporting my mother ever since Kelly went to college. Initially, she asked for $1,500 a month, which we settled at $800. When I said it was too much. This time, it dropped from $10,000 to $5,000 abruptly. Finding it all too strange, I contacted my fiancé, who suggested that I might be being deceived. It was a matter related to money, so a suggestion was made. 2 months later, various truths came to light. I learned the facts about my mother and sister and trembled with anger. Then I made 2 resolutions and decided to head to my parents' house unexpectedly. While on the train home, my phone rang with a call from my mother as soon as I reached the station near our home. I decided to answer. Rachel, you haven't sent any money for 3 months now. What's this about? I thought maybe it wasn't needed anymore, so I stopped. I need you to act responsibly. Send the 3 months' worth right now. What about Kelly? Kelly, she's about to have a wedding planning meeting. Oh, the wedding, huh? What kind of person is her husband? He's an heir to a major trading company. So, you see, she's been getting a proper allowance recently, right? $2,000 a month. Then she's set for the future, and all the more reason my support isn't needed. I'm a bit busy right now, so I'll hang up. We'll talk later. Wait, Rachel. I hung up unilaterally. My mother tried calling several times after that, but I ignored her. When I arrived in front of the family home, my mother and sister came out dressed casually. I followed them discreetly and, though I knew it, they entered a casino near the station. After about 2 hours, they came out looking pale and sighed together. I approached them from behind. Mom, Kelly. Did you enjoy planning the wedding? What? Rachel? Rachel. They were both very surprised to see me suddenly. What are you talking about? Wedding planning? Just. Kelly, what are you saying? We chose a wonderful venue together, didn't we? What? Mom, what are you talking about? I'm not getting married. Kelly, you know what's going on. Choosing the venue is important. Their stories were so inconsistent, it was full of holes. I continued. Wow, so wedding planning meetings these days are done in such casual sweatpants? Is Kelly's fiancé also dressed like that? That's because I'm not getting married. That would be impossible, right? Since there's no fiancé. Mom was saying he's the heir to a major trading firm. Mom, what are you talking about? Well. Recently, I heard Kelly has been sending $2,000 a month to you, Mom. That's impressive. How does she manage such a large amount? It's definitely impossible for me. If I had that kind of money, I'd spend it on something else. Right? I would do the same. It seemed my mother and sister hadn't coordinated their stories well. This was a trap my mother had set for me all by herself. Kelly? About the wedding planning, no, the casino planning, was it fun? Playing slots is fun, but it's been terrible recently. I just lost big time again. Right. As Mom says, choosing the venue is important, right? For slots. Absolutely. Picking the right parlor is crucial. It's no good in the middle of the day. You have to line up first thing in the morning. Ahahaha. As I continued to talk to my sister, more and more discrepancies emerged from my mother. She seemed to be scrambling for excuses, but she couldn't come up with anything coherent. All she could do was give a forced smile. So, Kelly, which private university did you go to? I'm not as smart as you, so I went straight to work after high school. But that didn't last long. I've been sending more money because Mom said you. We're going to a private women's college, women's university. A girl with my grades couldn't possibly attend such a fancy women's college. That's right. It's good you're still so natural. What's going on, Mom? What could be going on? My mother had gambled away all the money I sent. Gambling, naturally, involves wins and losses. There may be times when she won, but mostly, they were losses. Casino, in particular, is designed so that about 10% of people win. That means 90% lose. My mother and sister, having turned into gambling addicts, had lost their ability to make rational decisions, and were nearly at the point of mental breakdown. Mom, here, this is for you. A souvenir. What is it? This envelope? Is it a bundle of money? That's so generous. What are you talking about? It's a record of your actions for the past 3 months. Record of actions? My mother and sister intensely examined the contents of the envelope. It was filled with photos showing just how much they had been indulging in casino over the last 3 months. My fiancé's suggestion was to hire a private detective. They frequented the casino parlors almost daily, winning a little only to lose a lot. They had even started borrowing from payday loan services. Mom? If you and Kelly were planning to scam money from me, you should have coordinated your story better. By now, Kelly has told me almost everything, and it was all too sloppy. I was grateful for being sent to the Ivy League of Foreign Studies, knowing full well that it was all paid for with the inheritance Dad left us. I felt indebted to both you and Dad, which is why I kept sending money, never imagining it was being used this way. You've deceived me for 20 years. Rachel. I'm sorry. I'll stop playing slots, I can't win anymore. Please, forgive me. Me too. You're all I have, big sister. Slot is fun, but I'll quit. Why don't you two get serious jobs? So, if we get serious jobs, will you start sending money again? What? I was astonished by their response even now. You'll send us money, right? Otherwise, we can't get out of this cycle of debt. If you say you won't send money, I'll come to your house to take it. Surely our kind big sister will help us. We're family, after all. That's impossible. What? Pedro, come here. I called over my fiancé, who had been waiting nearby. Hello. Who is this? This is Carlos, his nickname is Los. We met at the company. And we just got married recently. I was going to introduce him to you, Mom and Kelly, but well, it turned out like this. I think this is enough. Los is very clear about yes and no, and he says he can't be family with people who are dishonest about money, so at the same time as introducing him, we've come to cut ties with you. How can you decide such a thing on your own? Los, please tell them in English. With a smile, my fiancé Carlos explained to my mother and sister. Ending ties with money is ending ties with us. This is common in the world. The end. My mother and sister listened with their mouths agape. What is he saying? If you don't understand, look it up in a dictionary. By then. Wait, Rachel. Rachel. Carlos and I caught a taxi and left the scene. For me, it was a final tour of the local sites. Carlos was delighted. After thoroughly enjoying our sightseeing, we took the train back. My estranged mother and sister ended up selling the house. My father left to pay off debts. But the property value was too low to sustain a decent living. They moved into a shabby apartment and tried to get by with part-time jobs. But their gambling habits didn't fade, accelerating their cycle of debt. It was an incurable disease. My husband Carlos, an executive at the trading company I work for, had finished his assignment in America and was finally taking me back to his native Spain. I had always dreamed of living abroad, though I converse with my husband using a mix of English and Spanish. When meeting people in Spain, it's purely in Spanish. The Spanish I learned is different in pronunciation from the Queen's Spanish spoken in Spain, akin to the difference between standard and countryside. Carlos had often pointed this out before we married, but he now says it has improved greatly. Language is indeed deep. Without the monthly remittances I was able to save, I still work at the company while dealing with American clients through. Fortunately, my husband detests gambling. Money earned through gambling vanishes as quickly as it comes, he says. Money earned through hard work is clean money, which anyone would use carefully. Carlos and I share similar values about money, like turtles. We save steadily and avoid wasteful spending. In today's uncertain world, you never know when you might need a substantial amount of money. For my happiness and for my family, I plan to treasure clean money even more. Please do something. I cried out, tears streaming down my face. But my mother-in-law and husband just ignored me. Covered in blood. They seemed more worried about the dog that bit me and whether the floor was stained than about me. Left with no choice, I called an ambulance myself and was transported alone. In the ambulance, I couldn't stop crying. During the transport, my husband called. "Oh. Send the ambulance back. Moms." He continued to shout desperately. My name is Sarah Brown, 34 years old. 4 years ago, a friend dragged me to a mixer saying, "There's a gathering with government employees. You're coming, right?" That's where I met my husband, Eric, 7 years my junior. My father is a basketball master and my mother is a PE teacher. Growing up in a family of athletes, with 3 older brothers who are all basketball experts, I developed a somewhat masculine personality. Eric, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. When we first met, his shirt buttons were misaligned, and he stumbled through his toast. A nice guy? Not bad at all, but he seemed to struggle to get things right. I found him adorable. and it tickled my maternal instincts. After several dates, I was the one who suggested we start a relationship. Eric always soothed me. Someone who could get a bit irritable. Eventually, I wanted to be with him forever. On our first anniversary, I'll take care of you for the rest of our lives. Let's get married. With those bold words, I proposed. Eric, teary-eyed, replied, "Sarah, that's my line. Thanks for everything. Let's keep it up." And we decided to get married. When we visited my parents for the first time, Eric was terrified by my stern father and 3 brothers. "Don't be so scared." "Yes," he replied loudly, but his voice cracked, making the whole family laugh. My father said he might not seem reliable, but he really fretted over the gift. And his love for Sarah is clear, which makes me happy. After greeting my family, it was time to visit Eric's family. According to him, his father had passed away from cancer 5 years ago. Eric's parents had struggled with infertility for many years, finally having Eric after 8 years. I'm usually quite straightforward and rarely get nervous, but I was truly anxious that day. On the way to meet my mother-in-law, who lives just 1 station away, I was overwhelmed with worry. What if she doesn't like me? Can I greet her properly? Will she dislike the age difference? Then, my usually unreliable husband reassured me. It's okay. Mom is kind and easy to talk to. She's known as always smiling Mrs. in the neighborhood. Really? That makes me feel a bit better. And nobody could dislike you, Sarah. Eric, thank you. Upon arriving at my mother-in-law's, I rang the doorbell. Nice to meet you. I'm Sarah. Thank you for your time today. Well, you must be Sarah. No need to be so formal. Come in. She greeted me with a warm smile. My mother-in-law was dressed in a beautiful dress and had an elegant and kind demeanor. Despite my concerns about our age difference, she said, "What are you talking about? Age doesn't matter. I'm happy that someone like you is Eric's wife," putting my fears at ease. She reacted positively to everything I said, making for an enjoyable time. The conversation turned to the toy poodle she used to have. Look, isn't it cute? I had it when I was in elementary school. It was a friendly and smart dog, but it passed away due to old age. Reminiscing, my mother-in-law continued, when Eric interjected. Mom, Sarah's not good with dogs. Sarah, you don't like dogs. Yes. Actually, despite my tomboyish nature, I've been terrified of dogs since one bit me. In the park as a child, resulting in stitches and a lifelong trauma. Oh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry for bringing up such a topic when you're uncomfortable with dogs. No. It's okay. The poodle in the photo was really cute. I reassured her. Hearing this, my mother-in-law gratefully responded, "Thank you." As our enjoyable time flew by, Eric and I headed home. Your mother is really beautiful and kind, isn't she? Right. Mom is always cheerful and gentle. That's wonderful. We chatted about his mother until Eric suddenly turned serious. Actually, I have something to discuss. Remember we went to my parents' house today? Yes, it was quite a large house. I was surprised. That's right. Dad built it with Mom in mind, considering the layout for easy chores. Even planning children's rooms in case we had kids. We never used them since I'm an only child. Now Mom's living there alone. And it seems too big for her, making her feel lonely. So, how about we live with her? Startled by his sudden suggestion, I widened my eyes. Indeed, the house was lovely and well maintained, a dream to live in. But we were just newlyweds, perhaps it was too soon to consider living together. After some thought, I said, "Your mother is really nice, and the house is more wonderful than I deserve." Then, but we just got married, right? I think we'd like to enjoy our newlywed life alone for a while. Yeah. You're right, Sarah. I'll let Mom know. Thanks. I'm sorry to make you explain it to her. I felt a bit guilty, but I didn't want to compromise by going along with something I wasn't ready for. Eric understood, and I felt relieved. Our married life began peacefully, with Eric continuing his clueless yet helpful ways. However, recently something's been bothering me. Hello, Mom? Oh. Got it. I'll come over now. Your mother again. Yeah. The living room light bulb went out. I'll go and replace it. Lately, this had been the norm, whether it was weekdays or weekends. My husband was always rushing back to his parents' house. Whether it was because Mom bought a computer but can't set it up, or Mom overshopped at the supermarket and needs a ride. While I sulked about spending weekends alone, I realized how caring and considerate Eric was towards his mother. A month into our marriage, it was my mother-in-law's birthday. We headed to her house with a present and cake we had picked together. As we entered, a dog suddenly rushed out. What? I exclaimed, startled, as I had not seen a dog there before. Being afraid of dogs, I instinctively hid behind Eric. My mother-in-law then appeared from the living room. Oh, welcome. What's with this dog, Mom? Well, I've been feeling lonely living alone. So I started keeping this little dog recently. Isn't it cute? It was a Welsh Corgi, a small breed. I see. Startled by the dog that suddenly appeared, I managed a forced smile despite my fear. My mother-in-law, unconcerned, said, "Come on, Sarah, hold him." I stepped back a bit and said, I mentioned before when we came for the marriage greeting. But I've been scared of dogs since one bit me when I was younger. I hesitated to hold the dog. Oh, was that so? I didn't know, she feigned ignorance. And to think he's so cute, what a strange person, she said, her face seemingly smirking. At that moment, I wondered for the first time if my mother-in-law was being sarcastic towards me. Since then, whenever my husband invited me saying, "Mom wants to see Sarah," or "Let's go see Mom," I declined, saying, "I'd love to see your mother, but I'm scared of dogs." I couldn't forget the smirk on my mother-in-law's face when she saw my discomfort. A month later, as usual, I came home from work to find my mother-in-law at our house. Mom. Oh, welcome back. As if nothing was out of the ordinary, she walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and started cooking. What brings you here all of a sudden? Eric said he wanted to eat my homemade stew, so I came over. Seemingly pleased that her son wanted her cooking, she hummed a tune. Oh, is that so? I tried to smile, but my face stiffened with fear. After all, her dog was in the living room. Perhaps she had fed the dog, as the plate licked clean by the dog was one of my favorite antique dishes I had bought at a flea market in France. How could anyone welcome this situation? I went to my room to put away my belongings and outerwear. Alone, I told myself not to get irritated since my mother-in-law had come. Took a deep breath and returned to the living room. That's when I saw the dog had soiled the carpet. You've got to be kidding. The newly bought carpet was stained yellow. Mom! The dog, on the carpet. I hurriedly called out to my mother-in-law, but she didn't seem rushed at all. "Oh, did he do that here?" she said nonchalantly. Not scolding the dog or even cleaning up. If left alone, the stain would set in the carpet. So I ended up cleaning it myself. I thought, seriously, what is going on? I was quite frustrated. Then I heard the front door open as my husband came home. The dog, reacting to the noise, barked loudly until Eric entered the living room. Even the barking scared me. Once the dog saw it was Eric, it calmed down, and I was relieved. The three of us sat down to eat my mother-in-law's homemade stew. During the meal, neither my mother-in-law nor my husband put the dog in its cage. So it wandered around our feet as if looking for scraps. My face froze in fear. And my mother-in-law remarked, "Sarah really is scared of dogs, isn't she?" Making such a frightened face. "I brought him along today thinking I'd help you get over your fear." Bringing the dog without asking, using my favorite plate, letting it soil the carpet. And barking, how could this possibly cure my fear of dogs? It only made it worse. I wanted to scream in my mind to put the dog in a cage or somewhere. However, my husband seemed completely unaware of my distress. Mom is so kind. Taking such good care of Sarah. I thought, how is this taking good care? It's just pretense, it's actually harassment. And then there's Sarah, completely unacceptable. Shockingly, my husband began lecturing me. Me? What did I do wrong? Mom's been trying so hard, and yet Sarah keeps running away from the dog. And you refuse to visit my parents' house because of it. You're not trying hard enough. My husband, perhaps because his mother was present, started blaming me with an arrogant attitude. I'm sorry. With my mother-in-law there, I had no choice but to apologize, biting my lip in frustration. After that, my mother-in-law frequently brought the dog over. Every time, the dog ran around the house and made messes. But she ignored it, showing no intention of disciplining it. Feeling stressed from these days, I reached my limit one day and pleaded with my mother-in-law. "Please, I've told you many times that I'm scared of dogs. Could you please refrain from bringing the dog over?" Summoning all my courage, I begged. Then suddenly, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed drastically. And she yelled in a high-pitched voice. "I always thought so, Sarah. You're using the dog as an excuse to avoid me. How terrible." I was stunned. I hadn't said anything like that. Even more shocking was my husband joining in. "Sarah, that's too much. Mom was thinking of you, and you've been avoiding her. That's rude, apologize to her." I protested. "Eric, you and Mom know I'm scared of dogs, right? And yet you keep bringing him over. And every time he makes a mess, I have to clean up. It's too much." My mother-in-law frowned, snorted, and retorted. "Just love the dog. You're old anyway. You probably can't even have kids. Is that what you really think? Because it's true. You're already 34. It's getting difficult to get pregnant, right? But my son is still 27. He's still got his future ahead of him. And here you are, a haughty older wife." She began to complain. She had said age didn't matter. I was shocked to learn my mother-in-law's true feelings. I couldn't stand her staying longer and tearing my heart apart. "Please never come back," I said, tears filling my eyes. Offended by my words, she retorted, "What an arrogant daughter-in-law," and left with the dog. From that day on, my disdain for my husband and mother-in-law grew. My relationship with my husband, who had defended his mother and blamed me, became strained, and we hardly spoke. One weekend, Eric spoke to me earnestly. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have considered your feelings more." Eric. I was relieved, thinking he finally understood my feelings. But then he said, "Let's go apologize to Mom now." What? Why does it turn out this way? Was I wrong that day? It doesn't matter who's wrong. Don't upset Mom. Please, just apologize. Ultimately, he hadn't understood anything. My feelings didn't matter to him. He forcibly took me to his parents' house. When we arrived, my mother-in-law was standing with her hands on her hips, waiting for me. Mom. I'm sorry about that day." Just to appease her, I apologized as my husband had instructed. But then she said, "I'll forgive you if you hold the dog." It was hopeless. This woman was unreasonable. I had apologized even though I wasn't at fault. And I had tried to compromise many times. Yet this was her attitude. "I've told you multiple times, I can't do it," I stated coldly. Then, enraged by my response, my mother-in-law forcibly pushed the dog towards me. In a reflex, I pushed the dog away and screamed, causing the startled dog to bite my hand. Ouch! My hand quickly turned bloody red. "Do something," I pleaded with my husband and mother-in-law. However, my mother-in-law only worried about the dog, saying, "Poor thing, got scared by such a loud scream." And my husband was checking if the floor was dirty, showing no concern for my pain. Deeply disgusted by their lack of empathy, my bleeding wouldn't stop. I managed to push the dog away and called an ambulance on my phone. Soon after, the ambulance arrived. How dramatic. "It's just a dog bite." My mother-in-law mocked me with a scornful look. Even as the ambulance arrived, my husband remained indifferent and kept checking the floor. Ignoring this terrible mother-son duo, I boarded the ambulance alone, shaking and crying from the pain and frustration. During transport, surprisingly, my husband called. Thinking he might be concerned, I answered, only to hear him say, "My mom. The dog bit her too. You must still be nearby, right? Tell the driver to turn back to the house." Hearing this, my feelings for him cooled completely. I didn't care what happened to his mother. Let them suffer their own consequences. I hung up without a word. At the hospital, the doctors said my wounds were deep enough to require hospitalization. I hadn't brought anything for an extended stay, so I called my parents to bring what I needed. Soon, they arrived at the hospital. "Sarah. Are you okay?" "Sarah." Lying in the hospital bed, they looked at me with concern. "I'm sorry for worrying you. It still hurts a bit, but I'm okay for now." "That's good. Your dad was really worried." "What happened?" "Well," I explained everything about my mother-in-law and husband's behavior. My mother embraced me, saying, "You've done well." Just sharing my troubles felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders, as I felt alone all this time. My father, however, was furious. "I won't forgive them." The next day, my husband called, furious. "What the hell?" Suddenly, the police showed up at the house. And they're interrogating my mom. I don't know. Maybe the hospital reported it? They asked why I was injured. And I told them your mom's dog did it. What? What if Mom gets arrested? It's your fault for being careless. Yeah, I knew you'd say something like that. But it doesn't matter, I wanted to tell you something. Let's get a divorce. What? We've only been married for 6 months. It'll be embarrassing. Our relatives and coworkers will laugh. I won't agree to a divorce. He hung up abruptly. A week after being discharged, with my parents' support, I went to a lawyer to discuss divorce and seek compensation. Despite multiple calls from my husband, which I ignored, he sent a message saying, "I'm at a cafe near your parents' house. Come here." He probably didn't want to confront my parents. Reluctantly, I went to the cafe. "I'm not agreeing to a divorce." That was his opening line. "Well, I'm not asking for your opinion. I want a divorce. I don't want to be with you or your mother anymore. Don't speak ill of my mother. It's your fault, isn't it? You say you're scared of dogs and avoid my mother because of it. The dog bit you because you suddenly screamed," my husband lectured me. As I sat there, dumbfounded by his words, my father and 3 brothers entered the cafe. It turned out that when my husband had sent that message, I had informed my father that I was being summoned, and he had called my 3 brothers as well. Surrounded by 4 well-built men, all trained in basketball, my husband's voice trembled and he shrank back. A comically pitiful sight that was frankly laughable. "My daughter has been hurt because of you. My sister wants a divorce. You agree, right?" Under their intense gaze, my husband meekly agreed. They continued pressing him until he agreed to the divorce and compensation terms. I handed him the divorce papers. "Please sign here for the divorce." Reluctantly, he complied and left the cafe. Thanks to my family's support, the divorce was finalized. And I received compensation from him. My lawyer also secured compensation from my mother-in-law for my injuries. It turned out the police had questioned her about the dog biting me, leading to a stern warning and her having to give up the dog. My mother-in-law had overly pampered the dog since she got it, leading the dog to perceive humans as weaker than itself. After biting me, the dog also attacked her, becoming quite aggressive. Her injury was severe, resulting in a broken wrist. Now, she struggles with daily activities due to her incapacitated wrist. My husband had to move back to his parents' home after we vacated the apartment where we lived together. Due to her limited mobility, my mother-in-law relies on him, asking, "Soda, can you help with the laundry? Can you cook something?" However, my husband had never done household chores before. Consequently, he was unable to manage laundry or cooking on his own. "Why can't you do anything?" "Oh, it hurts." "It's all your fault, Mom." It became a frequent argument between them, leading to endless quarrels. Furthermore, rumors spread among relatives and at his workplace that he was divorced due to his emotional abuse towards his wife, shredding his pride. Interestingly, I was the one who initiated these rumors. While hospitalized, I had shared his behavior with a coworker who was known for being talkative. Telling this person turned out to be the right move as he chatted about emotional abuse, mama's boy, and the divorce, making my husband an easy target at work. Serves him right. With the support of my parents and brothers, I am now living happily. I demolished your family home, you know? I was stunned and couldn't even speak at my husband's sudden declaration. My father had recently passed away, and I had inherited our family home and land. My husband had often expressed his desire to demolish my childhood home and build a two-family house, and it seemed he had finally resorted to extreme measures. I was devastated as my childhood home, filled with family memories, was destroyed, and I protested against him in tears, but he just grinned mockingly. Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I was able to clear the land. My name is Kate. I'm currently 27 years old and live with my husband, Matt, who is 3 years older than me. We don't have children yet. Before getting married, I lived with my father and focused on my job. My mother passed away when I was in high school, and since then, my father and I had supported each other. I had planned to work right after graduating high school, and I followed through by getting a job at a local company. I am still with the same company even after getting married. The work environment has been good since I joined, and I find my daily tasks rewarding. Matt has a somewhat unreliable side, but he has always been kind to me, helping with housework when he has time. So I have no complaints about our married life. However, my only concern is that I don't get along well with Matt's parents. At the beginning of our marriage, I wanted to get along with them as my in-laws, but it seemed they didn't think highly of me. They always treated me coldly, which only widened the distance between us. Gradually, I grew tired of interacting with them, and now try to deal with them without causing any waves. Thankfully, we don't live together, and I don't see them often. If we lived under the same roof, I might have collapsed from stress by now. Fortunately, my father lived in the same city, which was a source of strength for me, while the relationship with my in-laws was my only troubling issue. I thought we could continue our married life peacefully without any major conflicts. However, just recently, my father collapsed from an acute myocardial infarction and passed away. I was deeply shocked by the sudden loss of my beloved father. And after the funeral, I visited our family home multiple times to cry alone. But considering my job and life with Matt, I couldn't stay down forever, and I had just started to recover. With my father's passing, I inherited the family home and land, which no longer had anyone living in it. My mother was already gone, and since I have no siblings, the inheritance naturally fell to me as his daughter. Since I completed the inheritance procedures for the land, I've had more opportunities to discuss with Matt what to do about my family home. My father had once said to me, "You know, Kate, once I'm gone, you can do whatever you want with this house and land." In other words, the decision about the empty house was left to me. That house is a precious place where I lived with my family, filled with many memories. So, I have no intention of selling the land or demolishing the house for now. Although I have to pay property taxes, I want to honor my father and mother by sometimes cleaning the house and immersing myself in family memories. For that reason, my plan is to maintain the status quo for a while. However, Matt had a different opinion. When I acquired the assets, he seemed overly excited as if it was his own. It would be a waste to maintain the status quo. Since you've got a great piece of land, we should make effective use of it right away. Matt wanted to utilize the land where my family home stood as soon as possible, and our opinions were split right down the middle. Indeed, the house is located a reasonable distance from the station, and there are large supermarkets and other facilities nearby, making it a desirable location. However, the building itself is old and has many areas in disrepair since it was built before I was born. When we eventually have children, renovating the family home could be one option. Still, I simply could not accept Matt's opinion. This was because Matt was trying to push the discussion forward as if the house belonged to him, despite it being my family home. Furthermore, my in-laws, who caught wind of the house situation, were similarly involved. They often spoke as if we would all move to that land, making me feel like an outsider in the discussions as the heir. Seeing Matt and my in-laws so delighted, I felt a sense of crisis that my family home would be taken advantage of. So, I repeatedly emphasized to Matt, "Matt, that house and land belong to me, not to you or your parents. So don't go ahead and make plans without me." However, Matt just brushed me off, saying, "I know that. Kate, you worry too much." He never took me seriously. I had thought he was a gentle person despite being somewhat unreliable, but the moment I received my father's inheritance, his demeanor changed, and he hardly listened to me during our discussions. Because of this, I began to distrust Matt for the first time. And that feeling only grew with time. Amidst this situation, we came to a certain holiday. That day, Matt said he was going to his parents' house and left early in the morning. I was busy with household chores that I hadn't managed to finish during the week. However, less than an hour later, Matt returned with his parents. So I had to interrupt my chores to greet them. They might be good parents in Matt's eyes, but given the situation with my family home, I still found it difficult to engage with them. Susan and Steve, what brings you here today?" I hadn't heard anything from Matt about his parents' visit, and it was unusual for them to come over together without any prior notice. So I felt a bad premonition. I thought it was time to properly conclude what to do with Kate's family home. So, I brought my father and mother along. Matt answered with a broad smile to my question. My bad feeling had come true, and I felt my mood sink. "What do you mean by what to do? I told you several times that I want to leave the house as it is." When I firmly stated this, Matt immediately countered, "I've said it's a waste too many times. So, I'm thinking of demolishing your family home and building a new two-family house on that land. Then we can all live under the same roof." Huh? I was taken aback by such an outrageous statement. But I quickly raised my objections. "What are you talking about? There's no way I can agree to that. Didn't I tell you not to proceed without my consent?" Even as I desperately opposed, Matt and my in-laws just looked at me with exasperated eyes. Eventually, my father-in-law sighed and opened his mouth, sounding annoyed. "It's a shame to leave such good land unused. Why don't you start taking Matt's plans seriously? A wife should obey her husband." I couldn't say that Matt had never seriously listened to me. My in-laws care deeply for Matt, so they naturally side with their own son. Moreover, my father-in-law is quite rigid and holds strong beliefs in male superiority, thinking that a wife should naturally obey her husband. If I dared to oppose Matt in front of my father-in-law, he would surely yell, "How dare you speak to your husband like that?" That's right, Kate. We're already getting older, and we don't know when we might need care. It's better to think about the future and live together in a two-family house. We would feel secure living with you and Matt, my mother-in-law interjected next. While she spoke in a gentle tone, I felt that my mother-in-law just wanted to shift all the bothersome housework onto me by living together. Right now, she was acting like a devoted wife, smiling gracefully next to my father-in-law, but when he was not around, her tone toward me would become much more sarcastic. Whenever I visited my in-laws and found myself alone with her, she would meddle with unnecessary comments about when I would have children, or hurry me to show her my future grandchild. She would also use her age as an excuse to dump all the household chores on me. If I refused, she would insist, "Isn't it only natural to respect your elders?" What kind of family environment did you grow up in that you can't even do something so simple? I couldn't even imagine living in the same house with my in-laws, who constantly treated me with such sarcasm. That house is a precious home filled with memories of my parents and me. I have no intention of demolishing it. Please, just leave it alone for now. I was firm in my stance. However, it seemed that Matt and my in-laws were not willing to give up. Honestly, what a stubborn daughter-in-law you are. Given the future, it's clearly better to build a two-family house and live together. Your parents are gone now, so you should devote yourself to us. I couldn't help but scowl at my mother-in-law's dismissive remark about my parents. But I managed to hold it together. In the end, that day ended without any real discussion. Just everyone clashing opinions, and my in-laws left with displeased expressions. After that, Matt and I continued to clash over the family home and land. Our current house is small, and we should build a larger one for when we have children, right? Matt refused to back down from his insistence on building a two-family home. I could speculate that he just wanted to live in a spacious house with his beloved parents under the guise of wanting to prepare for children. While I understood the desire to live with one's biological parents in the future, I never nodded in agreement. I was convinced that living with my in-laws would only lead to more conflicts. Therefore, regardless of demolishing the family home, I had resolutely rejected any discussions about constructing a two-family house every time it came up. As a result, Matt would invariably become displeased. As these days went on, our relationship gradually became strained, and time passed without any progress in our discussions. In the meantime, whenever I had the chance, I would visit my family home to clean and pay respects to my parents' portraits. However, I entered a busy period at work and became unable to visit my family home for about a month. Because of this, I decided to bring my parents' portraits to my current home and display them in my room during this hectic period. I hadn't told Matt about this, as our conversations had recently escalated into arguments. So I thought it best to keep it to myself. Little did I know, I would soon be reminded that it was a good thing. I had brought at least the portraits from my family home. This incident occurred shortly after the busy period ended on a holiday. I had thought I would finally have a chance to relax, but that morning, my in-laws unexpectedly showed up at my house. Since I had been busy, I hadn't seen them since we discussed the family home. They arrived without prior notice, and Matt hadn't mentioned that his parents were coming. For some reason, they were both in high spirits, looking at me while laughing with Matt. "Today, we have an important matter to discuss with you, Kate." When my mother-in-law said this with a big smile, I sensed that the conversation would likely be something unpleasant. "What do you want to talk about?" When I asked, Matt stepped in front of me and said, "I already demolished your family home." I was left speechless in shock. I thought it might be a cruel joke, but from the triumphant smiles on Matt and my in-laws' faces, I realized it was true. "What? How could you do something so selfish?" Even as I rushed toward him in panic, Matt just smirked at me with an air of confidence. He had taken it upon himself to demolish my family home and land without my permission. Due to the busy period at work, I hadn't been able to check on my family home for the past month. It seemed that Matt had seized that opportunity. "Well, tearing it down myself was tough, but I'm glad I managed to clear the land," he said, feigning exhaustion. He had hesitated to pay for the demolition costs, and instead borrowed heavy machinery from his father, demolishing the house himself. In fact, my father-in-law owned a small factory and had several pieces of heavy equipment. He had likely lent the machinery to help his son without considering the consequences. Why would you do something like that without asking? I've been opposed to the demolition this whole time, haven't I? I couldn't tolerate the terrible actions of Matt and the others. Pleading with a trembling voice. My family home still contained many of my parents' belongings, and there were mementos like childhood family albums. The only thing that remained safe was my parents' portraits, which I had brought home with me. Everything else had been removed along with the rubble, and it felt like a nightmare. How could you be so cruel? I will never forgive you. I had reached my limit. Even as I glared at Matt, the three of them maintained their smug expressions. You've been so indecisive for too long, so I made the first move. We can't keep waiting for you to change your mind. Matt had an arrogant attitude, as if he had done the right thing. He continued, so, I took the land from your family home. His triumphant tone made me feel my anger shifting to disbelief. I could feel the love I had left for Matt quickly fading away. It seemed neither Matt nor my in-laws understood the gravity of their actions, and I let out a deep sigh. What are you saying? When did I ever agree to give you that land? I didn't even complete any paperwork, so it still belongs to me. It appeared that Matt didn't fully grasp the meaning of my words, looking puzzled, while my in-laws wore similar confused expressions. Since the registration process for the change of ownership had not been carried out, I had no recollection of transferring my family home or land to Matt. Therefore, the act of demolishing someone else's home without permission was, of course, a crime. You may not realize it since you didn't go through a contractor, but what you did is punishable by law. At that moment, Matt's expression hardened. Had he hired a demolition contractor, he might have known the consequences. I had no intention of going easy on him just because we were married, so I continued. Moreover, using heavy machinery on someone else's land without permission is a crime, even if it belonged to your father's company. I will be pressing charges. Previously, I had researched the legal implications regarding real estate crimes in case of any issues arising from the land I inherited from my father. I never imagined that Matt would actually resort to such extreme measures. When I mentioned the heavy machinery, my father-in-law, who had maintained a calm demeanor until then, suddenly raised his voice. Wait a minute. You two are married, so Kate's land is effectively Matt's too. Therefore, demolishing that house shouldn't be a crime. I've said it before, but the owner of that house is me, not Matt. Furthermore, I didn't agree to the demolition, nor was I even informed about it. What he did was a clear criminal act, so I will report this to the police. I can't just stand by while my cherished home is destroyed. When I replied calmly, my father-in-law was left speechless. It seemed he had taken this matter lightly. Although he lent his equipment to demolish the house, he hadn't considered that I, as Matt's wife, would think of reporting him. He likely thought he could make excuses after clearing the land. You're going to report Matt? You're his wife. There's no way you would actually do something so terrible. In place of my silent father-in-law, my mother-in-law shouted in a panic. You are the ones who are terrible for demolishing someone else's house without permission. This isn't something that can be excused just because you're husband and wife. After replying, I operated my smartphone and thrust the search results in front of Matt. The screen displayed the legal implications of the crime he had committed. What you did constitutes property destruction. It's a crime that carries a prison sentence without a fine, so you're definitely going to jail. Jail. My father-in-law raised his voice in panic, and my mother-in-law let out a short scream. Wait. Don't call the police. Think it over, we're married, right? Matt clung to my arm with a pale face. However, I shook off his hand firmly, saying, "Stop using our marriage as a shield. You destroyed my family home and all my memories." Then I stated, "I'm going to call the police now," and decided right then to report them. It seemed that Matt finally realized the irreversible mistake he had made. Am I going to be arrested? Me? No way, that can't be true. He mumbled in a tremble, and eventually, he foamed at the mouth and collapsed right in front of me. Afterward, Matt was arrested, and I moved out of the house we had shared and rented an apartment near where my family home had stood. I intended to get a divorce immediately, but since Matt refused, the discussions through our lawyers became prolonged. As a result, I was starting to consider filing for mediation at the family court. In the meantime, I was gathering information about Matt through lawyers and private investigators. What I discovered was that Matt had been frequenting strip clubs for years and had secret debts. He had apparently had his eye on the substantial inheritance I was to receive from my father, believing that if I came into a large sum of money, he could pay off all his debts. When I learned the truth, I was speechless with disbelief. Matt had told his parents about his debts, and shockingly, they had agreed to be co-signers for him. I could easily picture my in-laws immediately agreeing to help him, out of love for their son. Since Matt's arrest, it seemed his parents had been cleaning up after him regarding his debts. One day, I suddenly received a phone call from my mother-in-law. "Kate, help me." The urgency in her voice was palpable. It turned out she was asking me to lend her money outright. Apparently, they were being pressured to repay Matt's debts, and they were struggling financially. "Kate, you have your father's inheritance, right? Please share some of that money with us," she said shamelessly. I couldn't bring myself to take her seriously and replied curtly, "That's not possible. Please manage it on your own," before hanging up. However, anticipating another call, I decided to block my in-laws' phone number. Since I hadn't given them my new apartment address, they probably wouldn't show up at my home. I no longer wanted to be involved with them or Matt ever again. The phone call from my mother-in-law intensified my desire to cut ties with Matt, and I decided to file for mediation for a divorce. Eventually, the mediation was successful, and we got divorced. Afterward, my in-laws lost everything, including their home and my father-in-law's factory, and were left to repay their debts. They reportedly moved to a small apartment in the countryside and were living modestly. Years later, Matt completed his prison sentence, but found it difficult to get a job due to his criminal record. He seemed to have been arrested again for committing petty crimes like shoplifting. After my divorce from Matt, I was able to live comfortably by renting out the land he had cleared. With the inheritance my father left me, I would not have trouble living alone in the future. And I planned to continue working for a long time. Now that I was free from Matt and my in-laws, I felt I could work with renewed vigor. I hadn't thought about remarriage yet, so for the time being, I intended to enjoy my carefree single life while focusing on my job. Go home now. In the bridal waiting room, as I wished my daughter well on her marriage, she abruptly told me to leave. Her expression was far from what one would expect from a bride in her wedding dress, and I was baffled. With a disgruntled twist of her face, she said, "I don't need you in my life anymore," further deepening my confusion. Had I done something to warrant such a statement from her? "You're as good as dead to me, so just disappear." Her previously sulky expression twisted into a malicious grin. It seemed she had hidden my existence from her fiancé because she was ashamed of me. I never intended to live a life that would bring shame. But my daughter lined up numerous complaints against me, blaming me. Although her accusations were merely selfish presumptions. Pointing this out now wouldn't make her understand. I decided to fulfill the bride's wishes. "Yes, I understand. If my daughter doesn't need me, then it's fine." As per her wishes, I decided to keep my distance from her from now on. With that resolution, I left the venue. However, 3 hours later, she called me. I initially ignored the calls, but they were so persistent that I finally answered. She sounded desperate. "Come back to the venue right now. I am Grace." At 55, after divorcing my husband 25 years ago, I've been managing both work and raising children on my own. The reason for the divorce might sound cliché: my husband's affair. At the time, our son, Aaron, was 10, and Hannah was just 5. I struggled with the idea of taking their father away from them. However, my husband refused even to discuss it and left us with just a divorce application. I felt guilty toward the children, but continuing the marriage wasn't possible without considering them, since their father left without a second thought. Whether divorced or not, having an absent father would be the same. Hannah felt a bit lonely without her father, but after a month, she stopped mentioning him. Aaron was actually relieved about the divorce. Apparently, my husband had introduced his mistress to Aaron, thinking he would understand because they were both men. Aaron expressed his disgust toward his father. Aaron is now a lawyer, having been driven by his disdain for his father to help those suffering from infidelity. This year, after a decade with a law firm, he quit and just opened his own small practice. Hannah works in medical administration at a major hospital in the next town. Since graduating from vocational school, she's been living on her own and seldom visits home. While I feel a bit lonely, I'm happy knowing she's doing well. Now that the children are grown and independent, I'm enjoying living alone, often taking shortcuts in household chores. I sometimes settle for delivery or ready-made meals for dinner, and enjoy drinking alone the night before a holiday. One day, Aaron visited and brought me some pleasant news, although it wasn't about him. Surprisingly, Hannah was getting married. I felt a bit upset not hearing it from her directly, but it was undoubtedly good news. I asked Aaron about her fiancé, and he was astonished that I knew nothing. He seemed frustrated with Hannah. Hannah has always been negligent. She'd remember things she needed for school at the last minute, or bring up assignments past their deadlines. Probably, she either forgot to tell me or assumed Aaron would. Aaron sighed as he shared what he knew. Hannah's fiancé is a surgeon at the hospital where she works. They've been dating for 2 years. Given her track record of short-lived relationships, I was surprised that she managed to maintain one for so long. Aaron laughed, suggesting she must be serious this time. After Aaron left, I tried calling Hannah to learn more, but she didn't answer, nor did she call back. Getting through to her is rare, maybe once in 10 tries. But I needed more details. Her fiancé might come for a greeting, and there could be a meeting with both families. If her fiancé were visiting, I'd need to clean the house. And if I were meeting her future in-laws, I'd want to dress appropriately. I tried contacting Hannah several times, but she never picked up. Usually, she only calls during Easter or Christmas to ask about meals, or when she needs money due to financial hardships. She'd come home for holidays if her favorite dishes were prepared, but otherwise, she wouldn't. When she asked for money, I suggested she move back home if things were tough, but she'd refuse and just ask for a money transfer instead. She didn't want advice, just financial help. Hannah works in the town next door. Commuting from home would be financially smarter. But she refuses, so I occasionally help her to ensure she doesn't struggle to eat. Assuming she wouldn't want to hear any nagging, she probably didn't answer my calls. Reluctantly, I reached out to Aaron again. According to him, her fiancé's parents were busy working abroad and wouldn't be back until the wedding day. So there wouldn't be a formal meeting between the families. They planned to handle the greetings on the wedding day itself. Aaron suggested they should at least greet each other beforehand, but Hannah stubbornly refused. She insisted that the wedding was their own affair, and they'd marry regardless of any objections, so greeting on the day would suffice. I could understand her point, but knowing each other as soon-to-be relatives seemed important. Maybe my thinking is outdated? On the day of Hannah's wedding, I hadn't received any communication or invitation from her. But knowing the venue and date, I dressed in a formal dress to celebrate her. Probably, in her typical negligent manner, she thought Aaron had informed me and didn't send an invite. Maybe she planned to but forgot. I had some reservations about whether Hannah could manage being a surgeon's wife. But today was her big day, and I intended to celebrate without any criticisms. When I arrived, I wasn't sure where the bridal room was due to the multiple weddings and the crowded lobby. If Hannah had informed me, I wouldn't have troubled the busy staff. After the staff guided me to the bridal room, I thanked them and knocked on the door. Hearing Hannah's voice, I opened it. She was already dressed in her wedding gown, looking so beautiful in the mirror that I almost cried with joy. "Congratulations on your big day." As I spoke, Hannah's face contorted. I couldn't understand why she looked so displeased on what should have been a happy day. Perhaps she had some anxiety about the marriage, or was worried about getting along with her future in-laws. Pre-wedding greetings and family meetings would have eased such concerns, I thought. But today was her special day, and I didn't want to lecture her. I tried to reassure her with a smile and approached her. But she snapped, "Why did you come? You weren't invited," and forcefully pushed me away. I was shocked. I had never seen her be violent, though she was often harsh with her words. I couldn't believe she would do this, and though I hadn't received an official invitation, I couldn't grasp that she hadn't invited her own mother. "Go home now." My daughter glared at me and said. Her expression was far from what one would expect from a bride in her wedding dress, and I was utterly confused. When I asked her why she wanted me to leave, she twisted her face in displeasure and said, "I don't need you in my life anymore," which left me even more baffled. Had I done something to make her say such a thing? "You might as well not exist in this world for me, so disappear." Her unhappy expression twisted into a sly, malicious smile. "Why would you say such a lie? It's because you were such an unattractive woman that you got cheated on. And we ended up in a single-parent home, living a constrained life." My daughter answered in a rough tone. I had never intended to make my children live a deprived life. To avoid being labeled as just a single-parent family, I had actively participated in school events. I never missed celebrating important events like birthdays or Christmas. And I always gave them an appropriate amount of pocket money for their age. Although it might sound self-righteous, I managed to get both my son and daughter through college and vocational school without scholarships. This was possible because I had been working at the same company since graduating from university, holding a position that earned more than most women my age. Yet, my daughter still thinks we lived a poor life and lacked freedom. The allowance was too little, and the reason I couldn't go to the private high school I wanted was because you were the kind of woman who would get cheated on. My daughter looked resentful, thinking that if both parents had been together, she wouldn't have had to feel this way. She probably thinks that if both parents had worked, we could have afforded a more affluent life. Indeed, the reason my husband left might have been partly due to my lack of appeal. But not sending my daughter to the private high school wasn't because of financial issues. If she had a genuine desire to study something specific at that school, I would have sent her even if it had been a struggle. However, her only reason for wanting to go there was because she liked the uniform, so I simply didn't allow it. I was at a loss for words, never having imagined that she would blame our financial situation. Thinking I was cornered by my silence, my daughter attacked me with a triumphant look. I've worked hard not to end up like you, living a poor life, and making sure I wouldn't be the kind of woman who gets cheated on. From middle school, my daughter had put a lot of effort into her appearance, and she was quite pretty. Unlike me, who only wore simple makeup, she was very skilled at it. She had boasted about never being without a boyfriend. My daughter believed that I was cheated on because I lacked attractiveness. And she has always seemed to think that appearance is everything, despite my efforts to teach her that it's what's inside that counts. She never seemed to understand. People judge by appearances. Thanks to my beauty, I can marry someone high-spec. She snorted with pride. Since I'm marrying a doctor, if it comes out that I was raised in a poor single-parent home, the engagement might be called off. Just go home. But won't your fiancé find it strange that your mother isn't at the wedding? As my daughter continued to insist I leave, I posed a sensible question. She replied, that's fine. It'd be more suspicious if you were here. It seems my daughter has also lied to her fiancé and his family, claiming her parents died in an accident when she was in middle school. She told them that she and her brother supported each other using their parents' inheritance and that she was able to graduate from vocational school thanks to her brother's success as a lawyer. Moreover, she set herself up as a diligent girl who struggled to balance study and part-time jobs for her future. In reality, my daughter has never worked a part-time job. She hung out with friends almost every day after school, and her grades were below average. It's astounding how she could come up with such fabrications. Doesn't she think her lies will be discovered, or is she confident they won't be? I think such lies are easily uncovered. Also, she seems to think that me being cheated on and divorced is shameful. But I've never lived in a way that I consider disgraceful. Every complaint my daughter made was her own selfish belief or whim. But even if I point this out now, she would likely just get angry and not listen. Since today is her wedding day, I'll respect the bride's wishes. Yes, I understand. If my daughter doesn't need me, then so be it. As she wishes, I'll no longer involve myself with her. With that decision in my heart, I left the venue. While I was on my way home in a taxi, my son called. When he asked where I was, I honestly told him I was on my way back. What? Hannah's ceremony is about to start. He was very surprised. But when I explained what my daughter had said, he became furious. I'm not attending my ungrateful sister's wedding either. He said that and hung up. I don't know if he really went back, but that's for him to decide. When I arrived home, I changed out of my formal dress into something more comfortable and decided to relax. I had cleared my schedule for the wedding, so it looked like I could take it easy today. I poured some tea into my favorite mug and settled down to relax. About 3 hours after I got home, my daughter called. She had dismissed me as unnecessary, saying she didn't need me. I was angry too. Even as a mother who cherished her, being spoken to that way was infuriating. I have emotions too. Especially now, I didn't feel calm enough to talk, so I ignored the call. But she kept calling over and over, so reluctantly, I answered. Before she even confirmed it was me, she blurted out something incredibly selfish. "Come back to the venue right now." Why? The ceremony should be over by now, shouldn't it? I couldn't understand why she would insist on me coming back. After the wedding was surely over. After all, it was she who had told me to leave, so why should I return now? However, she kept begging in a near tearful voice. It seems the director of the hospital where she works noticed my absence at the reception and made a fuss about it. Unbeknownst to me, I had been invited by the groom's side. I work in medical device sales. I had been visiting the comprehensive hospital where my daughter works long before. She started working there, so I knew the director well. And the hospital was planning to sign a contract to introduce a very rare surgical robot in the USA, which the groom was going to use. That's why I had been invited to the wedding. Even without an invitation from my daughter, I could have attended because of the groom's invitation. But there was no sign of me at either the wedding or the reception. The director, noticing this, asked the venue staff to check the guest list. My name was already marked as checked in. However, even though all the hospital staff invited to the wedding searched the venue, I was nowhere to be found. The groom and the director were perplexed when a venue staff mentioned, "If it's that person, I guided her to the bridal room earlier, so I saw her leave." Now my daughter was being questioned by the groom and the director. Furthermore, the absence of her brother, who was supposed to have supported her all along, put her in a difficult situation. After being subjected to my daughter's unreasonable anger, I no longer felt like celebrating for her. However, I couldn't ignore my professional connections. Reluctantly, I decided to head back to the venue. My daughter sounded relieved and thankful. But even if I went to the venue, it wouldn't help her. If her lies were exposed, I would only tell the truth. My daughter would learn firsthand what happens when you care only about appearances and neglect your inner qualities. As I was getting ready, I received a call from my son, Aaron. It seems that my daughter, Hannah, had also called him asking for help. Although he was angry and had said he wouldn't attend the ceremony, it seemed he couldn't completely ignore his sister's plight. Aaron was waiting at a cafe near the venue, ready to attend the ceremony if Hannah apologized to me. However, as the time for the ceremony and then the reception passed, Hannah did not contact Aaron. It's unlikely that no one noticed the absence of the bride's brother. Hannah probably covered it up with some plausible lie. I sighed in exasperation at my daughter's continual lying. Aaron sounded frustrated on the phone, saying, "I don't think Hannah has any intention of apologizing. You don't need to go either, Mom." But because of my work connections, I had to go. When I told him this, Aaron said he would come to the venue with me. So we decided to meet in front of it. This time, I wore my business suit instead of the formal dress and hurried to the venue. I met Aaron in front of the venue and we proceeded to the bridal room from which I had been ousted hours earlier. Upon opening the door, unlike a few hours ago, I found Hannah out of her wedding dress and in casual clothes, along with the groom and the hospital director. I bowed to the groom and the director, apologizing for leaving after being invited. The director asked why I had suddenly left. I was told to leave by my daughter. I was just fulfilling the bride's wishes for her special day. The groom and the director, who had been told that Hannah's parents had died in an accident, looked at her suspiciously. I reintroduced myself as the bride's mother. Then, Hannah started to make excuses. No. This person is like a relative who took care of me. But Aaron interrupted her, saying, "She's our mother who raised us single-handedly." When Aaron corrected her lie, Hannah tried to pressure him. She was just a relative who acted like a mother, right? Right, brother? However, Aaron did not cover for her and scolded her for lying. Then turned to the groom to apologize for missing the ceremony. It seemed Aaron and the groom were meeting for the first time. According to the groom, Hannah had said, "My brother is a successful lawyer who travels around the country, and he can't make time until the day of the wedding," and had refused a meeting between the families. That was supposed to happen before the wedding. She probably wanted to prevent the truth about me being alive from coming out through her justice-driven brother. She must have thought that on the wedding day, with all the hustle, her lies would not be uncovered. Even if there wasn't time to talk to the groom, there should have been conversations with his family. It was naive of Hannah to think she wouldn't be exposed. If she truly wanted to erase my existence, she should not have invited Aaron either. But that would break the narrative of siblings supporting each other. So she had no choice but to invite him. "What do you mean? Hannah lied to me?" The groom confronted Hannah. She excused herself by saying she thought the engagement would be called off if it was known. She was from a poor single-parent family. The director was shocked. Poor? Who? The director knew I was a top-performing salesperson in medical device sales, which typically pays higher than normal sales positions. I might even earn as much as the groom, who is a surgeon. The director explained and Hannah said, "But I received little allowance. And I wasn't allowed to go to the high school I wanted because it was private." The groom, looking incredulous, asked how much allowance she received. In high school, it was $50 and in vocational school, $100. But that's gone quickly when you go out with friends. And my friends had much more money. The high school Hannah attended did not prohibit part-time jobs. Her friends simply earned their own money through work, unlike her. Isn't that enough money if you add a part-time job? That it runs out quickly. The groom pointed out, and Hannah looked caught. Indeed, she had told the groom she had struggled to balance study and part-time jobs for the future. It's no wonder the groom is suspicious. Was even the part-time job a lie? I can't trust anything about Hannah anymore. The groom slumped, overwhelmed. Hannah clung to him begging for forgiveness, but he remained silent, head bowed. The director, unable to stand it, asked if there were more lies. Then, in a flash of defiance, Hannah blamed me. "It's all because you were stingy." Apparently, she couldn't see that blaming me, when her lies had been exposed, would only worsen her image. I wondered how she turned out this way, when I had tried to educate her just as well as Aaron. Perhaps her education was the only thing I got wrong. Hannah had grown up just like her father, who was frivolous with appearances and spending, always ready to dip into the family budget when his salary wasn't enough. I had repeatedly cautioned her about money. When she wanted to go to a private high school and when she asked for more allowance. But it seems none of it had resonated with her. Whether I was stingy or poor, it was Hannah who decided to lie about it because she felt ashamed of me. I recognize the effort you made to be beautiful. But it's not right to adorn yourself with lies just because you lack confidence. As I pointed this out, Hannah snapped. I didn't lie because I lack confidence. I lied because I'm ashamed of you. Even so, it's wrong to pretend your mother doesn't exist. If she had simply said we didn't get along, it wouldn't have been a lie. If she hadn't piled on lies to make herself look better, she wouldn't have lost the groom's trust. I always tried to remain calm when admonishing my children, especially as they grew older, because raising my voice could lead to escalated emotions rather than a focus on the issue at hand. Surprised by my raised voice, Hannah flinched and froze. Aaron gaped in shock, and both the groom and the director voiced their disbelief, looking coldly at Hannah. Unable to bear the situation, she collapsed to her knees and started crying like a child. I thought to myself, this must be what chaos looks like. Only Hannah's crying filled the silence, and the atmosphere was stark. Then the director spoke up. This might not be the best time, but... He suddenly asked me not to cancel the contract for the surgical robot. I understood his feelings, even though it seemed an odd time to bring it up. I had worked hard to bring this rare surgical robot to the hospital where my daughter worked because of the director, unbeknownst to him. However, now that it was known my daughter was related to me, the director felt a crisis about the robot's introduction. The groom also pleaded earnestly. Even though my daughter had just been crying loudly, she seemed to realize how important the robot's introduction was from the director. And groom's attitude toward me and pleaded, I'm sorry. It was all my fault, so please, just the contract with the hospital. As it was a work-related issue, I wanted to say my daughter's behavior shouldn't affect it. But this time, I had mixed personal feelings into the contract. It wasn't the director's or groom's fault. But I told them I wanted to reconsider everything once I got back to my company. The director yelled at my daughter, "What have you done?" And the groom was in shock, murmuring, "My career." I decided this was no longer just a family issue but a hospital matter. And I left the bridal room with Aaron. Later, I received a call from Hannah. She had previously dismissed me as unnecessary. I ignored the call for a while, but she kept calling, so I reluctantly answered. "Mom, it's all your fault the engagement was broken off. What are you going to do about it?" As soon as she spoke, my daughter began to blame me. Despite having explained her mistakes and apologizing once, she was still trying to pin the blame on me, which was appalling. As I remained silent, she continued to rant about her current situation. It seems she had angered the hospital director, and rumors had spread within the hospital. The male staff who had previously adored her now kept their distance. Her already strained relations with the female staff had worsened, and the whispering had increased. Hannah was using her engagement to a surgeon to boost her status and complained, "Now that the engagement's broken off, people will say that women who can marry are winners. And those who can't are losers, right? So, what group do you belong to now, huh? They'll say it's the lowest, isn't it awful?" I was ashamed of Hannah just as she had said she was of me. No matter how much she polished her appearance, without inner substance, it was meaningless. I pitied my daughter for still not understanding. This even after her engagement was called off. When would she ever realize? "It's all your fault, Imam," so you need to take responsibility and take care of me for a while. I was shocked by my daughter's absurd demand. Apparently, she was planning to resign from her uncomfortable job at the hospital and return home. But coddling her now would not help her recognize her mistakes. I decided to toughen up, perhaps too late, but as they say, the mother hawk pushes her chicks off the cliff to teach them to fly. Everything you've done up to now has made you who you are. You're reaping what you sowed. My words angered my daughter, who hurled vile insults at me. But I was unyielding in my stance. Also, don't think about coming home. You tried to erase me from your life, so you should live by your words. When I told her I would not support her anymore, she flipped and spoke sweetly. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm. She seemed to find it hard to continue working and desperately wanted to quit. But living alone would be difficult if she resigned. She had come begging for money even while earning a salary, likely having saved nothing. She pleaded not to be abandoned. But coddling her would only encourage her not to reflect on her actions. Her behavior on the day of the wedding, pretending to be remorseful, and then showing no actual remorse, was a prime example. I simply told her, "You'd better try your best," and hung up. After that, she called many times, but I did not answer. Later, I learned from the director that Hannah had resigned from the hospital. I apologized for any trouble my daughter had caused him and her ex-fiancé. But the director said there was no need, as the surgical robot would still be introduced as planned. It's rather I feel sorry that I couldn't help your daughter enough to prevent her resignation. The resignation was her own doing. The director didn't truly feel responsible for her resignation. When I assured him not to worry, he easily shifted the conversation to the upcoming surgical robot. Hannah, now unemployed, was struggling with her job search. She had sold most of her expensive beauty products to make ends meet. I heard from Aaron. He also refused to help her financially. She gets carried away too easily when pampered. However, he sometimes took her out for meals. During one of those meals, she reportedly acknowledged how privileged she had been. I hoped she would genuinely reflect and grow into a self-reliant adult woman.